It's only been a few hours since the end of the GSL finals. Worry not, I'm not going to do any spoilers in this video. But we did see an epic Zerg versus Protoss match, and so it is a very timely time to talk about defending pressure in Zerg versus Protoss. Welcome to the show, guys. It's another PiG daily episode, and today we're going to be talking about just that, looking at, as always, a bunch of replays from IAM, because we really have been gifted a treasure trove of beautiful, beautiful replays for us to watch to our heart's content. Let's hop straight into game by actually clicking on the correct scene, not the wrong one. Let it go black screen for just a moment there before it does kick in. Alright, dudes, so what we're going to be looking at is defending pressure in Zerg vs Protoss, and this is a show where I've been wanting to talk about ZvP a bunch. I'm definitely going to do a build order guide on my own solid opening, which can be used for Hydra styles, it can be used for Lurker styles, it can be used for Ravager Zergling styles. I'm going to do that at some point in the future, but I've been thinking, okay, sure, you can do a build order guide, but there's a lot of people asking me advice about ZvP. There's a lot of people kind of lost in the matchup. What should I talk about? What do these people need to hear about? And I started planning a show just called Details of Zerg vs. Protoss, and I was like, all right, what we need to look at is all the little things. That's really what StarCraft is all about. And especially, you know, right up to the top of Diamond League and even many Masters League players, even some GM players, there's a lot of little details which get ignored in this matchup. And I wanted to talk about those things. However, as I went through replays looking at that, I realized a lot of what I was talking about was understanding the Protoss opening, reacting to it, and then also defending and adapting to their pressure. So for now, I decided, you know what would be a nice way to do this show? Let's just talk about defending oracles, defending adepts, defending a bunch of frontal attacks. Focus on those specifics with a few other details thrown in there that I'll be talking about. And this should give you a really good bunch of information for any Zerg players struggling against Protoss. Even if you're not dying to these pressures, you don't feel like it's putting you behind, this is definitely going to be worth a watch, because there are so many players I find just getting behind to these early little pieces of pressure here and there. You know, there's all these little adjustments you'll see a top pro gamer make, which are so good for your knowledge and your understanding to actually see why. Now, before we get any deeper, let's talk a little bit about this third hatchery. Of course, guys, this is Dark vs. Mana, by the way, from IEM group stage, Group D. Now, this is a fast third hatch before Queens even start. I wouldn't recommend this to most players. I would say 90% of the time when I see a player who is below, GM doing this fast third hatch opening, it's not really worthwhile because they're not refined enough in their opening. This is a really exact build order where Dark has it memorized down to the slightest details. He knows exactly to start this Overlord on 26 supply. He knows exactly how to defend a couple of faster depths and still come out in a decent position. Usually whenever I see people go for this fast third hatch, it's not worthwhile because a single adept or two come over, they're not defending it quite well, they get distracted, they get supply blocked for way too long on 28 supply. The whole build just doesn't quite come together. So I definitely want people to not just blindly copy the way Dark plays here. We're really going to be focusing on how he reacts from about, 3 minutes 30, 4 minutes onwards. A cool thing we do want to point out is the Zergling path. Let's go back just a little bit and very quickly look at this. This is something you want to be doing every single game. Now remember, if you haven't taken your third base this early, you always need to send your first 2 or 4 Zerglings, preferably 4 Zerglings, straight up here to your third to make sure there isn't a probe that's going to pylon block that base. If they get a pylon block there, you've only got 2 Zerglings, your third is going to get delayed for so long. And you notice even here, Dark is kind of looking for that probe, but then he spotted it for a moment and he's like, hey, alright, there's a probe somewhere. He's going to go look for it, but then he says, okay, there's going to be an adept coming across the map soon, probably. And I'm just going to keep hunting for these probes. And at a certain point, he says, okay, the probe's not here to be found. I need to go scout with the Zerglings. But notice he doesn't go straight across the map. He goes kind of through the north. And then as he sees this stalker down here, he says, oh, your first gateway unit's out in the open. So if you see an adept cross the map, if you see a stalker, that's when your Zerglings go into their base. Normally, though, you always path not on the shortest distance between your bases, but you go along around that. And you want to try and run into their base and get a free scout. And this is something which is so reliable on these maps with wide ramps. It's so common you can get this scout off And it's a big reason why people actually don't go for Overlord speed, actually, because most of the time, you can scout everything a Protoss player is doing with just running in a couple Zerglings like that, with just getting a slow Overlord and sacrificing it through. Dark, though, is obsessed with seeing absolutely every piece of weirdness his opponent's throwing at him, so he is going to go for Overlord speed. Once again, this is an opening which you can use if you want to, but you need to be really good at studying Protoss build orders, understanding and fine-tuning your reactions. I see a lot of players who go Overlord speed because it makes them feel more comfortable, but if you don't actually put any active focus on improving your responses to every little thing Protoss does, then there really is no point investing so much money so early in the game to this upgrade. What the hell is the point in scouting if you're not actually building a whole series of set, complex reactions to what you see? I think all these little details are very important. I think a lot of people kind of like to copy the best Zergs in the world in a matchup and try to do what they do. It's kind of the same way everyone was copying the 2-1-1 in TVZ. They're like, yeah, man, let's just all go Stim Marines. Like, we should just win every game. And while it is a nice build, it really plays to a certain set of skills. If you're a player who likes to, you know, pressure with Marines and try to get edges, then cool, that makes sense for you. But what if you're a player who's not as good at babysitting your units, and sometimes you just aren't watching and some Queens and Lings come out and snipe the medevac and Marines? It's probably not the build order for you. Likewise, Overlord speed is only for a player who likes to study scouting, study their opponent's builds, and really recognize exactly what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on this game. We've seen an Oracle come in. Let's talk about the response, and this is one of the most important things we're looking at in this specific replay. We are only looking at the early game of a few games, by the way. So he sees everything. Now, what's really cool here is timings. Memorizing exactly when things happen. And this is one of the best things you can do. Even if you think, oh, I'm only in Platinum League, I don't need to remember that. It's actually so cool once you start to memorize these game timers, because they will give you so much confidence. So check this out. If we take a look here, ooh, wrong scene. If we take a look here, that Zergling comes in and it sees exactly when the Stargate finishes. It also sees an Oracle starting up. Dark has 100% information of when that Oracle starts. Now guys, here's a few little tidbits. An Oracle takes 36 seconds. Let's just say 35 seconds, so it's a bit more of a round number. 35 seconds for an Oracle to finish. If it starts at, let's say, 3 minutes 20, even though it's actually a few seconds after then, let's say, okay, 3 minutes 20. Therefore, the Oracle will pop at 3 minutes 55. Now, how long will that take to get across the map? Let's say just 20 seconds, since it's a very fast unit and it can fly straight across to our base. It's not too far to fly to each other's base on this map. So what you can say to yourself is, okay, 3 minutes 20 plus the 35 seconds build time, that's 3:55. And then it's going to take another 20 seconds, so 4 minutes 15. Okay, cool. Well, you know, you can go through this complex series of calculations in your head, or you can just come up with a simple rule and say, when the Stargate starts building an Oracle, I want to have a spore crawler, I want to have a spore crawler, when the Oracle pops out of the Stargate. I want to start my spore crawlers, because then they'll be ready in time. Why is that? Because, guys, spore crawler takes 21 seconds to build. Roughly the fastest time an Oracle take to get across the map, unless you're on a minuscule map. So, yeah, basically you can just say to yourself, okay, so if I see it when the Stargate starts, 35 seconds from when the Stargate finishes building itself, starts building the Oracle, that's when I'll put my spores down. So if I was dark here, I would actually put down spores at, I'd say 3 minutes 20, 3:55 is when I'd put down spores. And this is the same sort of kind of calculation, which, to be honest, Dark probably does without even thinking about it, because he's Dark. And he actually goes and drops those spores just a few seconds earlier to be safe at about 3:48. But you can see this timing. He's dropped them just before the Oracle comes out. The Oracle will arrive, and this timing will be splendid. Let's put this on Marner's camera as he comes in and finds no damage. Now, there's another thing you can do as well. If you happen to already have a 4th Queen out that will be popped by the time the Oracle arrives, you can even skip one of your spore crawlers. This is for players who are a little bit higher level. Likewise, if you have a base which is more protected and a much less likely target than your other bases, in this case the 3rd base, you can actually delay your spore crawler there. Let's go back just a little bit and look at that. You're going to notice Dark is going to drop a spore crawler in his main. He's going to drop a spore crawler in his natural. Spore. Spore. but no spore in his third immediately. And this is where he's building a fourth queen. However, he makes the calculation. He says that queen's probably not going to be out in time if the oracle comes straight here, so I really should drop a spore here as well. And he does end up doing that. However, like I said, if he has two queens can chase an oracle off very, very effectively. So you can delay that spore for quite a while. But if you guys aren't the absolute highest level player, you're not trying to, you don't have spare APM to be cutting corners here and there, just do that simple calculation of you want to start building spores right around the time when you think the oracle's going to pop out. And if you're unsure, just pop it a few seconds earlier to make sure you're safe. Now, this is the first part of reacting to a Stargate, building spores. And the thing is, whenever I talk to 90% of players about how do you react to Stargate or how do you play against this or that, I'd say the biggest response I get is the direct response. Build things that shoot up. Make queen. Make spore crawler. I mean, obviously, that's the response to Oracle. That's the response to Stargate. But is that really the whole picture? Is that the only adjustment that goes on? No, not at all. And this is something a lot of players are blind to. I'm sure there's a few GMs listening who are just shaking their head like, I know this, pig. This is really, I guess, for pretty much everyone else. Where's the roach horn? Where's the baneling nest? He does put down a baneling nest, but this is not a very early baneling nest. Even here, he actually drops it earlier. This is Dark being ridiculously safe. A lot of Zergs will drop this at like 5 minutes if they're facing an Oracle opening. Now, why is this greedy? Because if you're playing against a Glaive Adept opening, you need this baneling nest down at like 3 minutes 30, 3 minutes 40 at the latest. That's when it needs to start. It needs to be finished well before now, because there could be 7 or 8 Adepts with Glaives rocking up to your mineral line. And if you've only got Zergling tech, you're going to have a bad time. But you've got to remember, if your opponent invests in Oracle, you know they can't hit you with a very hard, fast Adept timing. The best they can do is make a few Adepts without Glaives and hit right around now with 4 or maybe 6 Adepts at about 5 minutes. But even then, they're not going to have Glaives, so you can actually deal with it with only Speedlings. And that's something which is very important. So a response to Stargate, besides the obvious, is also delaying your Roach Horn or Baneling Nest until 4 minutes 30, sometimes 4 minutes 40, or in this case, Dark being very safe, 4 minutes 20. Actually delaying that stuff is very, very important. And from this position, you basically just scout with your Zerglings and Overlords very well. If you see Adepts come out, you just build a lot of Zerglings, and you just surround them and deal with them with pure Zergling. Now, Dark has a perfect macro setup from here, and he could easily just drone on up. But we're actually going to see him do a very cool timing, which we see a lot against Protoss players who open Stargate. Because Protoss players who open Stargate usually focus so much on just defending with Oracles, they're very light on the ground. You'll see them just get wrecked by this one timing attack, which involves, usually it's 4 queens. He only brought 2 queens this time. 4 queens in a drop Overlord, and a whole lot of Ling Bane. But Mana actually holds on here. It doesn't work too well. We're not too interested from this point anyway. Mana does end up losing this game, unfortunately, because he does overextend with a Void Ray counterattack and does lose the 3rd base, even though he was in a very good position. He just overextended slightly, and Dark barely got the 3rd. Let's hop out of this game. So I'm going to do this new trick, guys. I've got this new trick, right? So when I have to, because all these replays have been, patched since then, what I've realized is that a cool way to try and get back into the game nice and quickly is to just double click the replay from Alt F4ing out of StarCraft, and then I shouldn't have to log back in. It should do it all for me, which should be cool. So anyway, what are the big things we talked about there? It seems like these are really minute, but we talked about the Zergling pathing. We talked a little bit there about how a lot of the time you don't necessarily need to see everything with the Overlord speed. We're going to see that even more in this next replay, because we're going to go into a game of Serral versus Zest, which is now up. Oops, there we go. So this is going to be Serral versus Zest, and we're going to be looking at your reaction to a Glaive Adept timing here. And we're also going to be looking at it on the smallest map in the pool, where it is so hard to stop because your opponent takes about 6 seconds to shade from their base to your base. But we're also going to see Serral rely just on slow Overlords for scouting this game. And we're also going to see him poking around with Zerglings in this and another replay. And that's how Serral gets very consistent scouting. And even though there are chances where sometimes you won't see exactly what's going on, In those situations, because Serral saves that early 100 minerals and 100 gas, and that proliferates, that's not just 100 minerals and 100 gas. This is something I do talk about quite a bit. It's this idea of people always look at things and they're like, oh, if you just build a pylon at someone's natural and you cancel it, then you only spent 25 minerals because you get 75 minerals back, but you delay their expansion for so long, it's so worth it. It's not just 25 minerals though, because it's opportunity cost. And this is something where if you think about the way economy works, the more economy you build earlier, then your economy proliferates. Because if you invest in 2 drones straight away, then they're going to have more time to work, more time to mine resources and to invest into more workers. And so you get kind of a curve of economy that gradually increases the faster you kick off. It's the same reason if you lose 5 workers at the very beginning of the game, it's such a big percentage of your income that's dropped, and it really slows down that curve from picking up speed. So every worker counts very early on. So whenever you're investing even just 100 minerals and 100 gas at the very beginning of the game into Overlord speed, you've got to remember that is a big cost. And that's exactly why I was stressing so much before, this idea of you need to actually have very set reactions to everything to take advantage of that scouting. Because if you're not getting anything out of it, you've invested a shitload of money in something. Especially, gas as well is very valuable. So Serral never goes for that Overlord speed. I keep clicking on the wrong scene. In this current way he's been playing, he just always pokes around with his Overlords really well. And in this game, for instance, Zest isn't building a Stalker, but this is really common for Protoss. Protoss players don't really like building a Stalker because it doesn't help them pressure a lot very early on. They really want to be getting out as many fighting units to pressure the Zerg as hard as possible. They don't want to give the Zerg too much space to kind of get out of control. Now, let's take a look at Serral's scouting here. So if we go back to 3 minutes 20, let's look at the exact textbook reaction from Serral's vision on how to respond. Oh, that's a Twilight Council upgrading. Okay. And there's 2 more gateways at the front that he saw as well going down. Now, what's the timing of these gateways, guys? 3 minutes 15 to 3 minutes 30. Anywhere in that range? I'd say mainly 3:15 to 3:25 if you're playing a pro. That is the range you've got to watch out for. So he comes in, sees the Twilight. He sees the 2nd and 3rd gateway going down right now. Yep. And he goes, oh, okay. Glaive Adept opening. So what do we see? First thing is he's going to put back on gas here in the main base. You can see he's clicking drones on that main gas geyser. He's just done that. I know he zooms around very quickly. And immediately getting down to Roach Warren at 3 minutes 30. You can usually get away with this being quite a bit later if you're not playing Zest. So you guys could definitely get that a little bit later, 4 minutes, maybe, especially on a bigger map. You'll often see even pro players get it as late as 3:45. But Paladino, small map, playing against Zest, he's going to be really safe. So he's still droning for the moment, but he's already starting to build Overlords now. He's saying, look, I've got 16 drones on minerals, 3 on gas, 16 drones on minerals, and I'm droning my 3rd, just for a couple of workers. Not many, just a couple. And even now, he's actually saying, you know what? Probably not safe to drone at my 3rd. Let's pull those back. So he actually pulled the workers from his 3rd back to his natural, saying it's better to just try and focus on defending these 2 bases. If the Adepts go for the 3rd, I'm not going to have any target for them. And this is an adaptation specifically because this is such a small map. Notice that as the Roach Warren finished here, he built 7 Roaches, and he's going to build about 16 Zerglings as well. Serral's going to just chase those Shades. The moment the Shades are getting finished, he engages at the front with his Roaches, trying to push back. And now look at this. Subtle, but he's split. Roaches at the front to fight the Adepts, Roaches that were split further back. So you want to always split your force into force the Shade out nice and early and engage them at the front. You see here, those Roaches at the front engaging. And the rest of your units, especially your Speedlings on the back end. You don't want to be running your Speedlings out front and feeding them into the Adepts a few at a time. You really want to have those a little bit further back. So very careful, calm play here from Serral. Of course, what if he had drones on the 3rd? What if Zest was going for that 3rd base? What if this was a more standard situation on a bigger map? In that case, Serral would have wanted to have his creep out slightly further, and he would want to push out those forward Roaches to out about here. Try to force the Shade out a little bit earlier, so his defensive squad, which might be sitting here, can say, oh, the Shades are going to the 3rd, we can go north and follow them to the 3rd. What's important, though, is that's a situation which would happen on a more normal-sized map. Bigger map means more time to respond. Here on a smaller map, Serral just being very smart and limiting his focus. One other cool little thing which Serral did here is he's only gone one gas. Now, a lot of players like to put back on gas a little bit later, and they like to, you know, so they would say like, okay, you know what? I haven't been mining at gas at all this whole time, whereas Cyril left one dude on gas this entire time. And they would also say, you know what? Let's take a second gas and let's try and like, you know, get enough gas so we can build like 12 roaches, but like a little bit later. In this case, on a small map, if you're against someone who's doing a crisp adept timing, I really prefer Cyril's way. And this is the way I've been preferring myself, is just get the gas off the single gas geyser. If you're mining off this earlier, a little bit faster, you still get enough gas. He's got enough gas right now for 8 roaches already at, you know, before 4 minutes. That's going to keep you very safe, and it's just going to allow you to really streamline your mineral income, allow you to, you know, get up this saturation nice and quick. So on a more normal map, what's the general rule for drones? At most 2 gas geysers, 2 saturated mineral lines, and at most probably 5 or 6 drones on your third before you really build this defense. So if you want to be really safe, you very much struggle against Adepts, it's just about having 2 bases and 1 or 2 gas geysers saturated, pumping out a bunch of roaches. Some zerglings as well is really nice, though some players prefer to go just pure roach. And what else is the other thing? Now let's go back and watch the very first pressure here. Sorry, that we were at the very first pressure right then. Let's watch this first pressure. And what I want you guys to watch is both the production tab and this bottom display. I know I'm spending so long talking about how to defend Adepts, but this is super important shit. He says, I have 7 roaches out. I've only got 4 zerglings. Let's build some more zerglings. He's still building overlords in the midst of this. Whenever you see pressure coming, the biggest thing that non-pro players forget is to keep on building overlords. And they get supply blocked while dealing with the pressure. But Cyril keeps building overlords. He even adds a lair. So he's getting these zerglings out still because he doesn't feel like his response is quite ready. And at this point, even if those Adepts weren't kind of pulling back a little bit, we would see drones in this production tab in just a moment. You will see Cyril immediately at this point say, you know what? I got about 16 zerglings. I got my 7 roaches. I'm going to start droning. And this is even if the Adepts were in his mineral line carving up drones right now, Cyril would still be building drones at this exact moment. No matter what, if an Adept player wants to, they will kill workers. They will waste mining time. However, if that situation gets chaotic, your most important thing to come out ahead is to keep building workers in the midst of it. A lot of Zergs panic and mess up their macros, so not only do they lose drones and lose mining, they panic and take even more damage because of it. But the other thing is to pull drones away. If Adepts shade in, grab drones, run them over here, or run them to the natural. And a really cool trick you can do, something I like to do, is I often have a spare 3rd or 4th unit hotkey. If Adepts shade into my main base here, I will box these drones, mineral walk, and I will also go control 3. I'll put them on my spare hotkey, so then I'll be back microing roaches here, and then as these Adepts start shading out of the main, I can press 3 to select all my drones that are starting to transfer, and I can just go 3, click on the minerals back in the main. And this may seem like a very small thing, but this is something I find really good to help you very quickly in the midst of the chaos put workers back on their respective bases. Whereas otherwise you look at your natural and then like the workers have started to split in your mineral line and you try to box what you assume is 16 workers and you send them up here, but it turns out it was 24 workers or it was only 8 workers. And you know, your whole economy starts falling apart and you're like, fuck Adepts, no. Yeah, so that's about that. Okay, so finishing off this replay, by the way, common question people keep asking lately, let's fast forward. People keep saying to me, why don't people use Nidus Worms anymore? Do pros ever use Nidus Worms? Everyone used to use Nidus Worms all the time at the start of Legacy of the Void. Remember, it's invulnerable while it's building in Legacy. It's a really, really powerful all-in thing, but it's really hard to use it for pressure because the units don't really unload all that quickly, and it's incredibly expensive, right? So what you've got to kind of remember is Nidus Worms are only really good against certain things. Against Mutas in Zerg vs. Zerg. Against Hellion Banshee in ZvT. And against Heavy Phoenix play in ZvP. However, in this case, this is not the way you want to make this work. Because of this architecture, Cyril didn't think it through too much. You really can't push through the front. If you're going to Nidus on this map, you need to Nidus inside their base. You need to try to sneak an Overlord or an Overseer up, try to sneak them around the edge of the map past the Overseer. if you don't make that happen, you're just not going to make this work. And I mean, if we look at the scouting, there's no scouting back there. So if he did pop out in the main, that would have been great. The problem here is he just can't squeeze through the choke point. Overcharge, cannon, force fields. Serral just gets kind of destroyed here. I think it's a great strategy for this situation, but on a map where there's no wide open area to push at the front, you do really need to just force it out in the main base. We've also seen Dark doing it. Oh man, so much on his stream. Dark has been going crazy. Every Hellion Banshee game, he just giggles to himself, does a Queen Roach Nidus all in, and laughs his ass off all the way to the bank. So we're going to hop out of that game. Serral just gets pushed out kind of slowly. It's not that exciting. And let's take a look at our third game. So we've talked about some little things to do with Zergling scouting and Overlord speed as opposed to Zergling scouting. We've talked about how to adjust, not only knowing exactly when to build Spore Crawlers at the right time against a Stargate. By the way, I guess 4 minutes would be like your general timing versus an Oracle otherwise. No, let's not even do that. Just stick to what I already said. And now we've talked about how to defend Adept Shades and kind of recognizing that Adept build with the gateway timing. Remember, the gateways are about 3 minutes 20. Twilight Council was nice and fast. Talked about delaying the Roach Warren and the Baneling Nest. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some generic frontal pressures. I'm sorry for the black screen, guys. It's just because it has to kind of reload StarCraft as a new scene every time because it's loading an old version. That's why it kind of lags for a little bit there. So anyway, what we're going to see in this final game is Serral defending a frontal pressure and also crushing an Archon drop. But since I already have a daily on defending Archon drop, if you guys want more info on that, just go check out daily number 123. I talk about all the details of that, and it's pretty much exactly what Serral does so well. So what I'm going to focus on here is identifying the Archon drop, because even though I talked about that in that daily, we're just going to continue to talk about Serral's scouting and exactly what he does. So Serral goes for a hatch first. His Zerglings don't need to go clear up that third. Remember I was talking about that before? Because he sees the probe. So he's chasing the probe. It's very important to chase this probe to make sure it doesn't block his third base. He's got to do that. And then he does something interesting here, where these Zerglings just pull home, but he split one Zergling off. And once again, guys, remember, abnormal path across the map. Zergling goes around, and he did see the Adept leave before with his Overlord. He was watching on the map, he saw the Adept walk past, so the Zergling's going to run in, and this time Mothership Core's there, but he still sees the Twilight Council. Now, why was this a sure thing? This is something you want to pay attention to in your very early game with your first Overlord. Whenever your first Overlord comes in, what you want to see is can I identify where the first two pylons are? And whoop-de-doo, he's going to see that second pylon. Now, this tells you immediately, because the Protoss player has to drop their tech very quickly to be efficient. They need to drop it with their next 100 gas. Oh, he's at 100 gas right now. And this is even slightly delayed tech. But you've still, even with slightly delayed tech, because he squeezed the Mothership Core in, you've still got to drop that tech so quickly. It's got to be on your first two pylons, which means Serral knows the tech is here or here. The furthest back the tech can be is there. So just running in a Zergling in, it's going to see what's up 95% of the time. And he actually sees that fast Twilight Council. However, this could very well be the exact same build he was playing against in that game before. So Serral, being the smart guy that he is, grabs this Overlord, and he's actually told that to move in here, saying, even if this just dies, I don't care, because I haven't invested in that Overlord speed. It's a lot cheaper to lose an Overlord and a Zergling than it is to invest in Overlord speed. And upon seeing this robotics, he knows it's an Archon drop build. Even if he didn't see the DT Shrine, if anyone ever goes for a fast Twilight Council followed by a fast Robo, especially the fast Mothership Core is a big tell as well, and not many gateway units. So notice there was no other gateway units and the gateway wasn't producing. That's a sign of an Archon drop. The gateways themselves as well will come down later. What if you just see one piece of information? Even one piece of information is a pretty big tell. These gateways are only going down after 3 minutes 30. They go down at about 3 minutes 40, 3 minutes 45, and that's when he goes up to the 4 gateways. So Serral here says, well, with this opening, what does Protoss have as his goal? How do I understand this opening? Early Mothership Core to defend all ends. Single Adept to poke. And what else? Friggin' 0 units, dude. Just one Adept at home. That's it. This is the one Adept that poked earlier. Nothing else. This whole build is trying to get out the most efficient fast 4 DTs into 2 Archons with a Prism. But that's all it can do. It's not flexible. It doesn't have other options. And Serral knows that. So what has Serral done this entire time? He's built no fighting units. He has built nothing except drones. Now getting his Spore Crawlers right on time. He's got to layer up super fast so he can make Overseers. And he's building Roaches. And a very cool adjustment that's different to the more normal way of defending it, as I said in my other daily, is Serral doesn't really rush for his queens. He says, at my level, the more important thing than shooting the Warp Prism is just to have enough Roaches out to deflect the first wave of pressure. And look at this timing. Skips the Spore in the natural, because this is where he's going to make an Overseer. And he only starts adding a 4th queen to pop out a little bit later on. For him, he's just fully focused on having the ground units to stop this. And he's going to be able to manually pull his injecting queens over to help shoo away the Warp Prism whenever this happens. Sexy. Serral's just really, really good. I definitely would recommend building 2 extra queens and having them on a special kind of creep/defense hotkey, though, if you aren't Serral. Now, what we're going to see from here, guys, is an Overseer Scout behind that. He sees, okay, yeah, you're doing normal stuff. I don't actually see any signs of an all-in. He doesn't know that it's Blink on the Twilight. The Stalkers do deny him. And Zest is actually going to go for a super weird Blink Stalker timing to follow up this Archon drop. Really all in. 3rd base is essentially a fake. He's only at 50 probes. And you're basically, you want to scout this. If you're playing against something like this, you really do want to be scouting actively with Zerglings. Once you see even 2 Stalkers, that's already a pretty decent tell. But what else can you scout? The gateway count is the biggest thing. Seeing no robo units out, no sentries, that's kind of weird as well. But essentially just sending Zerglings at their 3rd, seeing what units they've got, and seeing their probe saturation is pretty important. A cool thing you can scout for whenever you go for an Overseer Scout or an Overlord Speed Scout is, are the lights flashing on the Nexus? There should be lights going up these little crescents if they're building probes. No lights, therefore no probe production. You see the lights just started up here. He's only building probes as he's pushing across with his army. So if you ever see those Nexi not building, that's a big tell that your opponent wants to hit you with a very aggressive attack. And if your opponent's not really saturating their 3rd fully, I mean, Serral sees this, you probably want to stop it barely 3-base saturation yourself. Even just stop at 4 or 5 gas geysers and have the minerals saturated on your 3-base. Maybe 60 drones should be more than enough to defend this very safely. Now let's take a look at how Serral does it. 67 workers. Oh, okay, you're just a friggin' madman. He did cancel his Spire and drop a Baneling Nest because he was building a very fast Spire and he's realized, oh shit, I've actually been too greedy. And yeah, he's going to have to just make as many Ravagers and Zerglings as possible. And the thing is, because Serral's a god and he took 0 damage from the Archon drop, he's actually going to defend, even though he was being quite greedy here. That's not really what I'm talking about. What we want to talk about is basically just his setup. Ravagers, Zerglings. This is the answer to every single attack that Protoss can throw at you. There is nothing that Ravagers and Zerglings do not beat. And this is for a very simple reason. Ravagers are friggin' amazing. They cast AoE, they've got great range, they're super accessible. You can have 10 Roaches, see an attack move out and go, oh shit, and morph 10 Ravagers as long as you've got the gas on hand. Ravagers are super accessible, and they combo with the Zerglings so well. They've got that range. Combined with the Corrosive Bile, they've got good range, good mobility. They're pretty much a speed Roach with extra range, which is great. Even though their regular damage is not amazing, because of their range, because of their Corrosive Bile, it's impossible to just zone against Ravagers. You can't poke in, poke out, poke in, poke out. In Heart of the Swarm, in Wings of Liberty, we used to see players poke in with Force Fields and Stalkers and just pick away at Roaches for ages, especially if they didn't have speed. And the Roaches just couldn't really do anything. But now against Ravagers, the Protoss has to shove in very fast. Because if they just dance back and forwards, the Ravagers will win out over time. Because they can zone with Corrosive Bile, and every time you try to dodge Corrosive Bile, the Ravagers are hitting you. They're mobile, they're doing that regular damage, they're a fantastic unit, they're very flexible. Combine that with Zerglings, which are only minerals, and themselves are an incredible unit, and you have the perfect defense against almost anything. Because if you think about it, guys, Zerglings are like one of the best units in the game. They are incredible. The reason Zerglings get a bad rep is for a couple of reasons. Number one, the opponent gets a big enough ball, stands in that ball, and the Zerglings, even though they surround it, can't get enough surface area on individual units And then because they can't get that surface area on those individual units, you've got the ball just kind of dishes out damage, and the Zerglings like aren't really killing anything, and the Zerglings are all just dropping away. The other reason is that Zerglings just kind of get torn, get force fielded out. That's the word I'm looking for. You know, the Protoss just force fields, Zerglings can't do shit. Suddenly you're like, wait a second, Ravagers break force fields, and if Ravagers are there with Zerglings and you surround an opponent, it doesn't matter how balled up they are to minimize the Zerglings damage. Ravagers suddenly can go, whoa, I'm just going to drop Corrosive Bile in the middle of your units now. And if you're all balled up, you're going to take massive damage. So the way the Zergling as a generically very powerful unit combines with the Ravager is just intensely powerful. And this is why against these Blinkstalker timing especially, it's actually almost easy to hold off. As long as you're not completely blindsided by it, Ravagers and Zerglings will just make mincemeat out of it, because Stalkers are especially bad at dealing with Zerglings. So really, the only big threats and the big scariest pushes we tend to see are things which do well against the Zerglings and really nullify them. Now, Archons here, of course, do well against the Zerglings, but just 2 Archons aren't going to completely stop the effectiveness and efficacy of the Zerglings. What is? A shitload of Glaive Adepts or Charge Lots. Those are the 2 things which are very dangerous. And that's why you need to have in your mind, what is my adjustment in those scenarios? How do I change what I'm doing to adapt to those scenarios? And what you got to say to yourself is, well, if it's just 1 or 2 Immortals, it's a rather small timing. There's really not that much anti-roach. Just mass Roaches. Have some Ravagers for sure. Mix in some Zerglings. But you know what? You're probably better off mixing in more Queens and pulling your Queens to the front against those big Adept and Charge Lot timings, because your Zerglings aren't going to add that much. If you do have Zerglings in that position, you kind of grab your Zerglings, and I mean, if you imagine this push is a some sort of big Adept army, how do you use your Zerglings against that? Well, you grab whatever Zerglings you have and you send them around, and you counterattack the third. You counterattack the natural. You force Warpins at home. You force engagements away from the front where the Zerglings can actually do something. Or you come in from behind and you engage on Immortals and Sentries away from the Adepts, away from the Charge Lots. Of course, as the attacks get bigger, there's always a turning point where just having Roaches and Ravagers is not that fantastic against Charge Lots, especially. So if you are dealing with the big 2 Immortal, 2 Archon Charge Lot timing that we see stats do every single game, you almost always end up needing to have a few Banelings mixed in there, and just having 8 or 10 Banelings mixed in so the Charge Lots can't jump on your army, it stops the Protoss from jumping on the Ravagers, and it allows those Ravagers to do that zoning and that buying time, which allows them to do damage. We've talked about it before. They spam Corrosive Biles out, they shoot every time your opponent's dodging Corrosive Bile. Ravagers can defend for such a long time and wear down the opponent with good micro, but Charge Lots, because they get rid of the Zerglings, can just jump on top of you and roll over the top sometimes. So if you ever see a Ravager Zergling look pathetic, it's usually because Stats is killing them with Archons and Immortals and Charge Lots, and that's where you do really need to have a couple of Banelings mixed in. Or occasionally an absolute immense Roach count where you can kind of one-shot the Roaches as they come forward. The problem is usually you'll get force fielded, so it's incredibly hard to micro. You need a lot of space, a lot of creep spread to micro that scenario. So cool. This is some interesting stuff we've talked about, guys. By the way, like I said, I didn't want to spoil any of the GSL final stuff. I do want to look at some of those replays. I might even do a show just talking about some of those situations. We'll see. We'll talk about it. Maybe I'll talk about it later on stream. For now, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today. I ended up going for a shitload longer than I meant to. Fuck, I don't even know why, but it's just interesting, right? This game, Cyril ends up crushing it. He's in a great spot. He does super, super well there. All right, yeah, let's finish up the show. Let's do that. I asked for people to ask questions on Twitter, and literally the only questions I got were troll questions. Nurtio asked me a Brood War question. TLO asked me how to be awesome or something. I don't know. I was like, thanks, guys. Thanks for your serious questions. But I was asking that like while the finals was on, so I can understand why people weren't really responding. And there we go. All right, so let's answer one question quickly in chat after the VOD. I'll do that. Anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out. Appreciate the support. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a watermelon to the moon. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and we will do some more episodes. I'll see you guys later. Bye. Yeah.